talk about the stomach here, and we'll pick up small intestine and the accessory structures Thursday, so we can then do a little bit of review as well. And I don't have to talk the whole time, at least lecture over new stuff the whole time. Last thing we got here in terms of the digestive system is where all of the adaptations are occurring. Throughout the entire alimentary canal, GI tract, from mouth to anus, the stomach is different. And the stomach's really different because of a handful of things. But one of the major things is that it has a third layer of muscle. Small intestine is unique and different because it has a lot of adaptations to it that we don't see anywhere else. We don't see in the large intestine. We actually lose all of those adaptations within the large intestine. So when it comes to the last couple remaining things here, these two are different because of what they do. When you look at the stomach here, guys, I'm gonna go, I think there's a picture here, maybe. There. We have the esophagus coming on down. Peristalsis is what triggers the rhythmic movement of this bolus of food down this esophagus, past this cardiac sphincter. Where's my little pen? Okay. We have a little circular sphincter of muscle right here called the cardiac sphincter, right? The inferior esophageal sphincter is the technical term for it. And we enter into this portion right here. This portion right here is the cardia. It's just where the esophagus meets the stomach. That's it. We have a region of the stomach right here, which is referred to as the fundus. And it just means dome. Okay. It actually comes in contact or close proximity to the diaphragm. And if you see it, you can see air in the stomach on x-ray, and you can see that fundus pretty significantly then. It just tells you that you're inhaling too much air when you're eating your food. We have the distal portion down here. This is the pylorus. This is where food sits, getting ready to be squished out the pyloric sphincter, which is this circular ring of muscle right here. And to get food chyme at this point, to leave the stomach, and you head into the duodenum, as you can see there. The vast majority of this thing is the body. This is where all the mixing occurs. The histology here of the stomach is unique because of two major things. One, super pH, okay, super acidic pH. So we're going to have a number of, well, we have simple columnar cells, but we have a copious amount of mucus that we produce here to help buffer the tissue from the acid juice of the stomach. Something too that we also see, aside from a longitudinal layer and a circular layer, is an oblique layer of muscle. So we have a third layer of muscle here. What does the stomach do? The stomach allows the expansion to occur as we fill it up with bolus, digested food, chewed up food from the mouth. And we have this extra layer of muscle to help churn it up and to mix that content coming in that we've shoved in our mouth, that bolus of food, we mix it up with the stomach secretions, all that stomach acid content, okay? So that's that third layer. That's what it allows that to do, to mix and grind up the bolus of food. We have a number of folds on the inside, these gastric folds. These are rugae, okay? This is what, allows the stomach to expand and returns to normal shape when you get rid of all of your digested material. We have a greater curvature and a lesser curvature. Here's a lesser curvature. Here's the greater curvature. In terms of curvatures, they're not too important, to be honest, but it's what attaches to those things. We have the lesser omentum attaches to this lesser curvature, and it helps to anchor down the stomach medially. We have a big old flap of fatty tissue that drapes down from this greater curvature, and that's going to be your greater omentum. Greater omentum, we talked about when we talk about the small and large intestine there. It's this drape of peritoneal tissue that is more fatty in components, more fatty in nature. It helps to compartmentalize the small intestine and large intestine. It also absorbs fat-soluble substances as well. So that greater omentum does a handful of fancy things. It also, unfortunately, if you do get cancer cells on any place that it touches, those cancer cells can get into that greater omentum and easily go from one side of the abdomen to the other side of the abdomen, though. That would be the bad thing about it. But that greater omentum attaches to that greater curvature of the stomach. Excuse me. The histology here, guys, is simple columnar epithelium. We have a number of, and that's all of them right there. Okay. We have a number of these pits. These are called gastric pits. Within these gastric pits, as you can see, they kind of go down all throughout the mucosa here of it. We have a number of different types of cells. These cells are going to be collectively referred to as gastric glands. We have parietal cells, we have chief cells, we have enteroendocrine cells. We have a number of cells that can be found within these gastric pits. And collectively, they just refer to them as gastric glands. But we'll see those secretions here in a second, because I asked a handful of questions based on those things. Already talked about that. So here is a nice up close personal view of that gastric gland with all those individual cells within it. There you can see the gastric pit. And along the right-hand side of that, you can see all of these individual cells. We have a number of cells that are mucus out here on the surface. We have a number of cells that go down the gastric pit here that are called mucous neck cells. Guys, if you see mucus cell blank, it's always associated with producing mucus. Okay? The contents of the stomach is very acidic. Okay, pH of like 2. We need a buttload of mucus to help buffer that high acidic content. So we have a number of mucus cells along the surface of the stomach, and then we have a lot of mucus cells down through the gastric pit. They just call them neck cells and surface cells. So surface mucus cell or mucus neck cell, doesn't matter, always produces mucus. Mucus, 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 mucus. It helps to prevent the stomach lining being eaten away by the high acidic content. So yeah, okay, boring. So let's go over here. Chief cells. We have chief cells, we have parietal cells, we have enteroendocrine cells or G cells. They go by a couple different names depending on the book. Chief cells are the most numerous, okay? Why are they the most numerous? Well, they're doing what's making the contents acidic to begin with. They help to produce pepsinogen. Pepsinogen is inactive. Okay, pepsinogen is inactive. Anytime you see a gin on it, OGEN, it usually means it's in the inactive form. You mix pepsinogen with hydrochloric acid, and that allows us to do something major here. It allows the stomach to break down proteins. This is where protein breakdown begins. This is where protein breakdown, the vast majority of it is occurring. Okay. We break down proteins initially here. You don't do it in the mouth. Okay. We do not do that in the mouth. That's carbohydrates. Here in the stomach, I need a lot of pepsinogen, ultimately becoming pepsin, to be formed, because this is what the stomach does. Helps to initialize and start the process of protein breakdown. If I don't break proteins down significantly enough, and by significantly enough, I mean into smaller chains, 2, 3, anywhere between 3 and 8. If I don't break the protein chain of amino acids down to 3 to 8, 3 to 10, the stomach has not done its job properly. The stomach needs to do that to ensure that the few secretions that occur within the small intestine break down those final segments of amino acid chains into individual amino acids. So then we can absorb them. Okay. So that's what chief cells do. Their big claim to fame is pepsinogen. Pepsinogen plus HCl gets me pepsin. Pepsin breaks down proteins. It also does a little bit of gastric lipase. It has a very limited role as adults. It may have a slight more function as a child, as an infant, when the vast majority of your food comes in breast milk and it has a high concentration of fats within it. So gastric lipase is also secreted by chief cells. But when it comes to fat digestion, it's not a whole hell of a lot. So, but chief cells do produce it. So huge part of your life early on, not so much later on. Parietal cells do something important. Parietal cells help to make hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid is that stuff that mixed with pepsinogen to get me pepsin. It also obviously helps to fuel the pH, the high acid content of the stomach. Parietal cells also secrete intrinsic factor. And why is intrinsic factor important? Because of vitamin B12. Intrinsic factor basically binds to B12. By doing that, it makes it easily absorbable in the small intestine. B12 is fabulous for a number of things. One of them is red blood cell formation. If you don't secrete intrinsic factor in the stomach, it can't be absorbed in the last portion of the small intestine, the ileum. If I can't absorb it, then you're going to make malshapen red blood cells. Too big, has a nucleus, not going to be able to carry as much oxygen. Okay. So B12 is necessary for normal red blood cell growth. That's why I have that here, because it is a pretty important thing. And it is secreted by the parietal cell specifically. Here it's kind of showing you how it makes hydrochloric acid. See, we get a little bit of water there, metabolic water. That helps us to, when that gets produced, we break it down because we can utilize it inside the cell. We break it down into hydrogen ions and hydroxide ions. Hydrogen ions gets pumped out into the space of the stomach. CO2 and OH, well, that makes bicarbonate ion. And remember, when bicarbonate leaves, chloride always comes in, and there's chloride ion. Gets pumped out into the lumen there, and those two suckers come together, and ta-da, there is your hydrochloric acid. So that's how we get that hydrochloric acid inside there. What does it do? It helps to break down proteins. How does it break down proteins? By converting pepsinogen to pepsin. And it also, I mean, it's pH of 2. So it helps to kill off any foreign invader that may be in your uncooked food. So we have chief cells secreting pepsinogen and gastric lipase. We have parietal cells secreting hydrochloric acid and intrinsic factor. The last one is the G cell, or the enteroendocrine cell. These guys are unique. They are called an enteroendocrine cell for a reason, because they secrete a hormone, and the endocrine system is associated with hormonal secretions. They secrete gastrin. G, that's where they get their name from. Okay. Gastrin actually yells at all the other cells. It tells the parietal cells to secrete more hydrogen and chloride ions, or hydrochloric acid. It actually causes the chief cells to secrete more pepsinogen, more intrinsic factor. Okay. It yells at all of those other cells to secrete more mucus secretion. If we have more hydrochloric acid being produced, we need more mucus to buffer that. Okay. So gastrin is the big claim to fame here. I don't believe I asked somatostatins. Somatostatins are some other type of secretion that are done by other enteroendocrine cells associated with the stomach. And so they help to buffer what the G cells do. You always have to have a yin and a yang to everything. And gastrin stimulates everybody. Somatostatins calm everybody down. So it helps to calm down the G cell production, so you don't produce a pH of 1 constantly, because that's not normal. pH of around 2, 3 or 2 is generally ideal. When you get to around pH of 1 or less than 1, then you're too acidic. That's when you're going to have ulcers. It can denature proteins excessively, so it can cause some issues. So gastrin and somatostatins kind of work in tandem with one another, but I don't believe I asked somatostatins. If I did, it would be one question. If I do ask that one question, it would just be for bonus. So don't worry about it. This is what the bolus does. Bolus is what you form in the mouth when you chew food. And mechanical and chemical digestion occurring there within the mouth. Chemical and mechanical digestion occur here within the stomach as well. As that bolus of food enters into the stomach, it starts getting mixed with the digestive juices of the stomach. The mechanicalness of all 3 layers are crunching all of that together there and forming it into this disgusting paste-like material called chyme. Once we've broken down the food significantly enough, this bolus of food significantly enough, and made it into this mush, you got to get rid of it. As you can kind of see there in the picture there, that's a lovely picture. You can see we get all those peristaltic waves, okay, occurring there. It's mixing up that bolus of food. God, it looks just disgusting, doesn't it? Breaks down that bolus of food into smaller and smaller bits, increasing the surface area, allowing more surface area for interaction with the secretions of the stomach, right? Helps us to break down that protein, helps us to break down that stuff. Okay. These peristaltic waves end down here at the pyloric sphincter. It's usually closed. Only when we've broken this down significantly, and it's going to stay here for a few hours and do this, okay? So I'm going to stay here for a few hours. And this ultimately is going to cause all of this, as soon as you break it down, this retropulsion, to get that sphincter to open up. When that sphincter opens up, now you're really going to start the absorption of nutrients. Okay. Because as soon as that pyloric sphincter opens up and relaxes just a little bit, you ooze out a little bit of that chyme. It shuts up real quick and then opens back up and then shuts down and then opens back up and shuts down. Okay. And that's what this retropulsion is. It allows only a little bit of the chyme material to be let go from the stomach. And I hope that is intuitive. If I dump all of the chyme material out at one time, there is going to be way too much material for the gallbladder, the pancreas, and the duodenal cells. There's going to be too much material there for those three entities that are going to be doing the secreting in the small intestine to be able to secrete enough to absorb enough. If I allow that sphincter to open up and then close back down through that retropulsion type of activity there, I regulate the amount of chyme entering into the duodenum. Therefore, I can maximize absorption. That's the only significant reason to know that word retropulsion. Okay. It is just rhythmic contractions that occur there, stimulating the pyloric sphincter to relax, but then it contracts right after that. And that really only allows a small amount of chyme at this point to enter into the small intestine to ensure optimal absorption of nutrients in the small intestine, because that's what the small intestine does. There are a number of specific types of cells that regulate this rhythmic movement to occur. Just like the heart has pacemaker cells, so does the stomach. I didn't ask it. Okay. I didn't ask it. There's similar pacemaker cells found within the small intestine. They have a crazy name. They are triggering smooth muscle within the small intestine to relax and contract, very similar here as well. Okay. Interstitial cells of Cajal is their crazy ass name. Again, I'm not getting into all that. Okay? I'm not getting into the rhythmic contractions that occur with the stomach or the small intestines, just that they occur. I'm not getting into the reasons of how that happens. We don't have time. And it's not intuitive. It's very different from skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle. What we do have here is secretions within the stomach. When it comes to secretions in the stomach, they occur in three phases. All right. And again, I asked these as a fantastic multiple choice type question. There are a few multiple choice type questions involved with the swallowing process. We see them here as well. Okay. When you go into a restaurant is where you usually go to be served food. We don't do that anymore. So when you go into a restaurant or go into your kitchen, just the thought of food being made. And right there, as you start thinking about it, you started secretions within that stomach. You feel them in your mouth with saliva, but the same thing is happening with the stomach as well. The cephalic phase, this is when we start to get the stomach primed for digestion. Okay. You want it primed for digestion, like upwards of like 20% of gastric secretions from all of those cells, chief, parietal, G. All of that, 20% of that happens just by the damn sheer thought of thinking of food or seeing food being made or smelling food being made. Okay. Putting it in your mouth. I want the stomach ready. So when that bolus of food plops down in there, I can start breaking it down. I don't want the bolus of food to enter and then I have to then get all the cells to start doing their secretion. And that can take a handful of minutes to get significant amount of secretions to occur to get those nutrients to be broken down. So I want to prime the pump. And that's what the cephalic phase is basically telling me, okay? There are appetite centers found in the amygdala and the hypothalamus. To be honest, I didn't ask about it. I didn't ask about the appetite center. This was all done via the vagus, okay? And it's that vagal tone, because remember the vagus provides sensory and motor to everything within the abdominal cavity. This would be one of those, okay? So vagal tone is, the vagus nerve is what's actually stimulating this. Again, seeing, hearing, smelling are all special senses. Parasympathetic involvement, vagus nerve, that's what's kickstarting this all off. Gastric phase occurs when that bolus meets the stomach. Okay. Gastric phase is what happens when the bolus enters into the stomach. Okay. And it's stimulated by, okay, it's stimulated by acetylcholine, but I want you to remember gastrin. Okay. Because that's the one that we talked about as one of those cells and one of the secretions of those cells. Okay. I asked about gastrin. I didn't ask about acetylcholine. Okay. Acetylcholine acts as a hormone here in that regard, but I didn't ask it. Okay. Gastric secretion is stimulated by gastrin. Let's just leave it at that. What does gastrin do? Gastrin yells at everybody to do stuff. Parietal cells to start secreting hydrochloric acid. Chief cells to start to secrete pepsinogen. Intrinsic factor as well. Okay. Increasing mucus production. This is getting the area ready for the breakdown of proteins. Again, we want to stay around a pH of 2. To be honest, I can't remember if I asked it. I've said it a whole bunch of times, so maybe it's a Freudian slip. I don't know. But it's those G cells that are secreting gastrin that causes this kind of positive feedback loop. Okay? That causes all of the other cells to do more and more and more secreting. Once we get to that pH of 2, though, once we dip below it, now we're going to get a negative feedback loop. Once we drop below pH of 2, now it becomes a negative feedback loop. And we inhibit gastrin secretion. If you've gotten to that pH of 2, holy smokes, you've broken stuff down. Okay. Now we're just going to increase peristaltic activity to mush it all together. And after a few hours of that stimulation, it's going to cause the pyloric sphincter to open up, and now we can slowly release the contents into the intestines. The intestinal phase, when chyme leaves. Okay, when chyme leaves. This involves just an intestinal reflex. It's contraction of the duodenum. As soon as content enters into the duodenum, it causes the duodenum to contract, which makes sense because I want to start moving this stuff forward through the system again. So it just increases peristaltic activity, okay, of that intestine to start to move it around. It also helps to inhibit the activity of the stomach. So as soon as that chyme material enters into the intestine, we get a secretion of cholecystokinin and secretin. This acts on the stomach to slow it down and to stop it. It also does a number of other things as well. It's going to cause other cells to start secreting, but we'll talk about that when we get to those other cells on Thursday. Again, makes a great, fabulous few multiple choice type questions. I know there's questions on cells and what they produce in the stomach, what those secretions function in doing. I know there's a question about cholecystokinin and secretin and how they affect the stomach. I do know that those are on there. If we do not have enough mucus produced, that high pH content will cause an erosion of the mucosal lining. An erosion of that mucosal lining is a peptic ulcer. I didn't ask anything about treating it. Non-burning pain in the epigastric region is generally the symptom for it, which can be kind of similar to, heartburn. But if we can't control that pH balance and it gets below pH of 2, you can see how this can become crazy, burn a hole through your stomach and perforate it. And if that's the case, you're probably going to die.